Can we take? Boker Tov Lekulam. Good morning, everybody. I would like to start the session. Please turn off your cellular phone. So welcome to the conference on Peace Parks on Israel Borders, the Syrian case study from theory to reality. The conference is sponsored, as you see. We got a lot of participators from the university, the Moshe Dayan Center for the Middle Eastern and African Studies, the Tammy Steinitz Center for Peace Research, the Daniel Abrams Center for International Regional Studies, and the University Institute for Diplomacy and Regional Cooperation. The Porter School of Environmental Studies is especially pleased to initiate this conference that emerged from a research conducted by our student. The initiative for this day conference came from a special person. Her name is Shachar Sadeh. Shachar Sadeh, whose research is on this timely project where nature, preservation, and politics merge. Shachar Sadeh is doing her PhD with two advisors. One is Professor Dani Rabinovich from Tel Aviv University, and the other one is Professor Avner Deshalit. That is the motto of our school, interdisciplinary school, who deal with 9 faculties of the university. I would like to give special thanks to Professor Eyal Ziser of the Dayan Center to his professional insights about the sensitive subject and his cooperative spirit from the very beginning. By the way, it wasn't easy to create this conference on this topic. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Uzi Rabi from the Daniel Abrams Center and to Dr. Ephraim Lavi from the Tammy Steinitz Center. The complexity of this subject requires more than one perspective, so we are glad to have partners in the organization of today's conference, and I would like to thank all the sponsors, obviously, and especially I would like to thank the Public Affairs Office of the U.S. Embassy that helped us to bring our guests from abroad, and the Office of the President. Special thanks I would like to the team of the school, to Jennifer Gar, and obviously Shachar Sadeh, and to Rui, and the rest of the staff. Without them, we will not be able to do the conference. So as a first opening speech, I would like to ask Professor Dani Leviatan, Director of Tel Aviv University, who is a strong supporter of the school, the Porter School of Environmental Studies. Please.
Thank you, Aryeh. It's a pleasure to be here. Full house. It's very interesting. I'm a mathematician, and a pure mathematician, so I cannot say anything about people who do imaginary things and work in theory. I will be not politically correct and say that for me, peace in Syria is an oxymoron. There are more experts than I in the audience, and maybe they will refute what I say, but I will not be here to listen to them because I will have to go to do some other things. I do hope that someday there will be peace, and maybe the park will help in that, but I must say that I personally am very doubtful, very, very doubtful about the whole thing. However, okay, let's hear, and finally we'll have a PhD thesis, and then I'll have to sign it or not sign it, and I will see what's in it. So I wish you an interesting conference, and good luck also in the endeavor of getting peace in the Middle East. So, good.
I would like to invite Professor Eyal Zisser, the head of the Dayan Center, to say a couple of words.
Good morning, and thank you, Aryeh. I have a dream. I think it's all about dream. It's all about dreams. I have a dream that one day we might be able to achieve peace between Israel and Syria, and I do have a dream that one day there will be such a wonderful peace park along the joint Israeli-Syrian border, but at that point it is indeed, at least at that point, it is indeed only a dream. And still, I think this is a rare, it's really, when I think about it, a very rare opportunity when a conference, a mere academic conference, initiated a heated debate. Those of you who followed the last week Israeli newspaper, one of the major newspapers, Yediot Achronot, published an article about the Golan Heights and the prospects for Israeli-Syrian negotiations, for the resumption of this negotiation, and it was thanks to this initiative to launch and to hold this conference. So this conference has to do with many important issues that now are being debated in Israel. I do hope that, well, the politicians seem to be very hesitant about the whole idea of resuming negotiations and bringing into the table creative ideas. So maybe we will try to fulfill the vacuum, and let's hope that the outcome of this conference will not be only newspaper articles, but also academic works, and maybe eventually one day also a peace agreement between Israel and Syria. So thank you very much.
And now I would like to invite Professor Pinchas Alpert, the head of the Porter School, and we just have Dame Shirley Porter, who is the founder of the school, came in. And Pinchas, come please.
Dear participants from all over Israel, I saw the list, very impressive list, and to our keynote speaker, Professor Salim Ali. I would like to bring, thanks to Jennifer for pointing and reminding me these two traditional points that support what we are going to talk today. One is in the book of Numbers, chapter 35, talking about space around cities, the importance of the open space. And my translation, each town should have an open space, migrash in Hebrew, with a minimum distance, which is dictated, of 1 kilometer, 2,000 amot. This is one interesting law in the Bible. The other is from a Hasidic tale, without a short story, which points out about, I think, the main point of today. In Jewish tradition, when there is a conflict, you go to the rabbi. And the rabbis have to show wisdom sometimes to solve conflicts which are really look like unsolvable, as the rector just talked a few minutes ago about the peace treaty with Syria. Here it is, the story, the Hasidic tale, that two men are fighting about a piece of land. Each claimed his ownership and brought proofs, kushan, You know, everything, all the documents. To resolve the differences between the two people, they agreed to bring the case before the rabbi. The rabbi listened, but couldn't come to any decision because both seemed to be right. Finally, he said, "Since I cannot decide to whom this land belongs, let us ask the land itself." So he put his ear next to the ground, and after a moment straightened up and said, "Gentlemen, the land tells me that it belongs to neither of you, but that you both belong to it, to the land." I think there is wisdom in this tale that we have to think about every time that we have a conflict. I'm looking very much forward to learn today more on how an environmental project can become a major tool for peace building and cooperation between rival states. I hope this small step today, to which the Porter School of Environmental Studies is a participant, along with 4 important centers in Tel Aviv University, I hope that this small step with the Peace Parks Conference will bring us eventually to better life in the region. Thank you. Okay, now I change the hats and I'm the chair of the first session. The keynote lecture is going to be given by Professor Salim Ali, and this talk is going to be about peace parks, conservation and conflict resolution. Few points about Professor Salim Ali. He is an associate professor of environmental studies at the University of Vermont, Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources, and is also on the adjunct faculty of the Brown University's Watson Institute of International Studies. I choose few points from his CV. First of all, his main research focuses on the causes and consequences of environmental conflicts and how ecological factors can promote peace. Professor Salim Ali did his master's in Yale University in environmental studies in 1996, and in 2000 he completed his PhD in environmental planning at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, on the title of Environmental Resistance and Aboriginal Development, a comparative study of mining ventures in the US and Canada. I picked up from his CV that he speaks some languages that I never heard about. So, he is speaking fluently English, but also Urdu and Punjabi. These are Pakistani languages. And also Arabic and Persian, French and Spanish. A little. Okay, you understand. Cannot tell you about it. He published in this short period 5 books in very impressive places like Yale University Press. The book is outside there, Treasures of the Earth, Oxford University Press, MIT Press, and the University of Arizona. There are many awards. I will only mention one of them. He was invited for a closed meeting with the Dalai Lama to discuss conflict research and water security related to the Tibet region, and many other prizes. What I liked very much in the beginning of your CV is the word you quote St. Augustine. As you know, I like old literature. Much wisdom is there. We tend to read recent articles, but there's a lot of wisdom in the past. And I liked what you quote from St. Augustine. The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only a page. Please, Professor Salim Ali.
Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me. I'm delighted to be back in Israel. I was here first time in 1992 as a student, as an undergraduate, more on a tourist trip. And sadly, things have changed for the worse since then in terms of peace. But I am still an optimist at heart, and I hope that this conference will perhaps reinvigorate some of those potentials for peace, which in the early 90s were much more vibrant than they are today. I should mention that my talk is going to be quite general in nature, because I don't want to be presumptuous in presenting the case of the Middle East to you when there are so many experts who know far more about the Middle East and peace building than myself. So I'll try to present more the conceptual map of how ecological peace building can occur. I'm originally from Pakistan. I can certainly share some of the perspectives coming from a country which has also been embroiled in conflict with its neighbors and internally, and is facing some challenges specifically these days that many of you might be interested in knowing about. And I know that you don't have many Pakistanis visiting Israel by any means, as I found out at the airports as well. But I'm really happy to be here, and I commend Tel Aviv University for being courageous enough to handle this topic at such a very difficult time. And this wonderful assortment of sponsors shows the commitment of the university and people from so many different fields to this endeavor. I also want to remind you that people in the Arab world and in other parts of the world are also very keen on ecological peace building despite the difficulties. Only 2 years ago, I was invited to a conference in Beirut on a very similar theme. And you would be surprised perhaps to find, perhaps the rector would be surprised to find, that in Lebanon also, this was just a year after the conflict, there were people who were very interested in ecological peace building. And you'll find that in Korea also, for example, where I visited a few years ago, there was very keen interest also in ecological peace building. It's a theme which occurs time and again. It unites us in our common humanity. So I would urge you to at least for today, to dispense with cynicism, which is very easy for us as human beings to sink into, and to try to be positive, no matter how difficult the issues might be. Even though I am an optimist, I'm also a pragmatist. Okay? I do not want to pretend it's going to be easy to build peace in this region. And so I want to start with the challenges that confront us. First of all, we have the challenge of the concept of ecological peace itself is questioned. When the Nobel Peace Prize was first given for an environmental cause in 2004 to the Kenyan activist Wangari Maathai, some of you may be familiar with her work. She started the Green Belt movement in Kenya, and it was the first time that the Nobel Peace Prize was given for environmental issues specifically. There were some very scathing editorials, including this quotation from The Economist, with characteristic British sarcasm. They said, "But what does planting trees have to do with peace?" And not only was it The Economist, but also the Journal of Peace Research, which is published by and edited by a Norwegian, Norway being where the Peace Prize is given. He wrote a scathing op-ed in the International Herald Tribune saying this was a big mistake, that the Nobel Committee was giving a prize for environmental issues and lo and behold, what does environment, the low politics of environment, have to do with the high politics of war and peace? So you have even the editor of the Journal of Peace Research questioning this. So this is something which we have to take seriously, that the challenges are very severe, not only regionally but conceptually. And then regionally, I put in some recent quotations for you. The Syrian Foreign Ministry statement from December 10th, in terms of the potential for Turkish mediation. And then also from a columnist in the Haaretz, whom I couldn't figure out if he was being sarcastic. I presume he was, and so I put in sardonic columnist, because I sent him an email after I read that, and he said, yes, I'm all for peace, I've championed peace. But the way he put that article, the way he wrote it, was very dismissive of potential for peace building as well with Syria, similar to the way your rector was speaking today as well. And so this is, I'm not going to read it out, but essentially what he was saying was, so what do we get by building peace with Syria? So we are dealing with tremendous challenges. We are dealing with challenges of concepts, of narratives across the board. But we shall not give up so easily, because these narratives have occurred in many other conflicts as well. Okay? Let us not forget that only less than a century ago, you had a situation when the entire world was embroiled in conflict and several million people were killed. You had a situation where 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, and who would have thought that within a matter of a few decades, those countries which had been embroiled in such acrimonious conflict, when 250,000 people were incinerated within a matter of minutes, that they would now have such good diplomatic relations that you don't even need a visa for Americans to go to Japan. So things can change, transformations can occur beyond what you might expect now, and so I would urge you to keep those narratives in mind. The narrative of environmental peace building is also tied in with science in many ways. Linus Pauling, the image on the top left, won a Nobel Prize in the sciences and also a Nobel Peace Prize. Rajinder Pachauri, the head of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, representing the IPCC, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize recently also. If the Nobel Prize is to be some touchstone for what it's worth, these are positive signs also of science and environmental peace building as well. And then you have 2 other images. You have Anatol Rappaport, a Jewish-American, amazing mathematician. Again, it's nice that the rector is a mathematician, because there would be a nice connection that mathematics can lead to peace building too. Anatol Rappaport, in fact, was someone who founded the Movement for Ecological Peace and wrote a book by that topic. He formed an organization, Scientists for Peace. Okay? And he was also very sensitive to the concerns that Israel has, and yet he was willing to move in that direction. We have an image there of Israeli and Palestinian and other Arab science teachers who have been involved in various Track 2 efforts as well, in using science for peace building. Okay? So now let's think of the concept as I've studied it in terms of environmental security. This is a diagram which I prepared for this book on peace parks that I edited a couple of years ago. And the first chapter of that book lays this out in much more detail. If you're interested, the first chapter can be actually downloaded for free if you're interested from the website of MIT Press. And I think they have linked it to the conference website as well. So the narratives we're dealing with in terms of environment and security broadly are in these 2 axes, if you can call them such, between cooperation and conflict and between scarcity and abundance. So often what we find is the environmental issues are in this B quadrant, where people talk about scarcity leading to conflict. Okay? So you're dealing with issues of maybe overgrazing, the tragedy of the commons, overuse of water. All those things would be in this quadrant. Scarcity leading to conflict. What we call in the conflict resolution literature distributive conflicts, right? If we think about quadrant C, this is what we refer to more recently. Some of my other work has been on mining and minerals, and as the director also alluded to. In mining and minerals, we talk about this concept of the resource curse, where you can have an abundance of resources in certain contexts, in places like Congo, for example. So it's not scarcity, but it's an abundance of resources and a lack of governance and other issues that can lead to conflict also, right? So it's not just scarcity, but it can be abundance in a different context. Quadrant D is what I refer to as the Star Trek quadrant, because that's not the world we have now, but it was the vision of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, which was that you'd have a world of abundance where you could lead to cooperation. Because, you know, some of the key elements of Star Trek, partly I use this for my students in an academic setting because it's, you know, it's something which they relate to more easily. But Gene Roddenberry's vision was that in Star Trek there would be no countries, right? And that there would be no money because you would have abundance and that would lead to cooperation. The only civilization in Star Trek that uses money are considered the primitive Ferengis, those of you who follow Star Trek. But we are not in the Star Trek world. It's something perhaps in the distant future we may aim towards. There are regional governance regimes that are evolving, for example, like the European Union, which is an interesting model of how countries that have been historically in tremendous conflict have evolved to some degree to cooperate. I mean, it's quite remarkable that you have France and Germany using the same currency now. You know, 40 years ago, no one would have thought about it. So sometimes these things can take on a life of their own, but that's that quadrant. What I'm interested in is quadrant A, which is scarcity leading to cooperation. A lot of the peace sparks narrative is in that quadrant, okay? And in the middle is what we have to all contend with in terms of different kinds of regimes, right? You can have hegemonic motives, you can have countries or communities which want dominance, you can have technological issues that can potentially be a way by which we can reconfigure from scarcity to abundance, and governance, of course, is very important, right? So especially with issues like minerals, if you can have processes which have accountability, then you can prevent some of those other factors which can lead to conflict, like the lootability of the resource. So for example, for diamonds, we have the Kimberley process as a means of having a governance system to prevent the negative aspects of that quadrant C, okay? Some other pathways to ecological cooperation that we should consider. First, you could have distributional cooperation over a necessary resource. A lot of the narratives around water are in that arena. There tends to be a polarization around water. You have the water wars people and the water peace people. And I've tried to move away from that kind of polarization because it's not very fruitful. But in academia, those of you who study this will realize that there are people who say, well, water has always led to wars. And then someone else will document all the wars in history and say, well, actually, with water, there were only a few which were there. But then someone else will say, well, actually, but you know, that was a proximate cause, but not the ultimate cause. I think that's not very productive, really. What I say is you can potentially have distributional cooperation if the regimes are appropriate. And you can have that with water, certainly. We've seen that happen in the case of India and Pakistan, for example, with the Indus Basin Treaty. But that doesn't mean that that precludes the potential for conflict in the long term because of scarcity being sometimes much more so than it was predicted, and other factors. So we need to think in terms of the potential for reconfiguring the use of water or other resources in distributive terms as a means of cooperation. The second area is cooperation over what is referred to in sort of the game theory literature as a dilemma of common aversion, okay? Generally, when we talk about resource conflicts, we talk about common interests leading to conflict. This is a bit of a, you know, for some maybe an oxymoron because you say common interest should be cooperation, but often when you have common interests and you have scarcity and lack of trust, you actually get competition and conflict, right? So you often want to reframe the common interest in a way where it's framed in terms of a common aversion to depletion or deterioration of quality, right? Like in a lake, for example, where you could have a deterioration of quality of the lake leading to a problem for all the people who are going to use the water of the lake. And that would be a dilemma of common aversion, which would urge people to conserve the lake, have some kind of conservation regime around the lake. The third area where environmental issues can lead to cooperation is in terms of crisis. Okay, we saw this with the tsunami, with the Asian tsunami, where there's a sudden crisis. People are suddenly made to realize the importance of the environment in terms of their dependence on the resource. It can happen after an earthquake. And that can lead to cooperation sometimes, but not always. We also found out that in the case of the tsunami, in the Aceh conflict in Indonesia, it catalyzed cooperation, and it led to a resolution of the conflict. But in the case of Sri Lanka at the time, it led to an escalation of the conflict, and ultimately to the war last year, which finally led to the termination of the Tamil leadership, though it's arguable as to whether that conflict is over or not. So it depends on how the issues come out, but that's another pathway that has been considered, and it's been studied by people like Michael Renner, if you're interested in that arena. Now, peace parks specifically, just first of all to give you somewhat of a definition, the term is used in many different ways, and there's no general universal definition of peace parks, so I'll define it for you in terms of how I think of it. Sometimes people refer to memorials as peace parks. Like in Hiroshima, you have this collapsing dome, it's a symbol of the bombing, and that park is referred to as a peace park. That's not what I'm getting at. Those are memorials, okay? Those are not really what we're trying to get at. There can be also other kinds of peace parks which are more just conservation areas which are bordering each other, right? And those are these transboundary conservation or protected areas. And there are about 240 of those. And they are sometimes referred to collectively as peace parks. I would say only a few of them would fit my definition of a peace park. A lot of them are adjoining areas which recognize that the environment defies borders, and therefore you have the same ecosystem on both sides and you've got conservation on both sides. But sometimes there is no cooperation between the conservation agencies on that, right? So then I would say they're not peace parks if they're not cooperating with each other. They're just adjoining transboundary areas in that way. There has been an effort since 2003 to try and document all these protected areas. And there's a website which the World Commission on Protected Areas under the World Conservation Union, IUCN, or now it's reverted back to its old name again, International Union for Conservation of Nature, they have set up. And I'm a member of the World Commission on Protected Areas. That's not a big deal because there are 1,000 members actually in the world. So the Transboundary Protected Areas Network tries to document all these different areas that are there, and currently there are about 240 of them. And a lot of them are now beginning to get more cooperation, because there are some international treaties, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Migratory Species, the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, which mandate that countries that have bordering protected areas cooperate with each other. Okay? So there is increasingly, through those conventions, more cooperation. And we're in a law school, so we have lawyers here, eminent lawyers here as well, who can comment on this more. But that international legal system is evolving more so. It's still very much soft law, but it's evolving slowly. In some cases, it can have some more important repercussions as well for those countries economically. How I define a peace park is if that conservation zone, conservation area, can be instrumentally used for resolving conflicts. If it is not being instrumentally used, then we don't want to just refer to it as such for marketing purposes. Okay? Now, there is maybe one other category that I might say is that area might be helpful in sustaining existing peace. So there may not be a conflict there. So the world's first peace park, it was Waterton Glacier. There are people who argue that there was one in Eastern Europe also, but the one which was operationalized, the first one was Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, which is between Canada and the United States, between Montana and Alberta. Now, of course, Canada and the U.S., we have our rivalries. I live close to the Canadian border, but we're not at war, you know. So to call it a peace park in the sense, in my first definition, would not be accurate, but it has sustained a certain peace and it has allowed for certain activities which would not occur in other border areas. So, for example, when my book came out, the Canadian government was kind enough to launch it at the Peace Park because it was also the 75th anniversary of Washington Glacier. So we had an international meeting where we got a lot of protected areas managers from all over the world to talk about transboundary conservation. And we entered all from the Canadian side. And this is after 9/11. There were people from all over the world. It was easier to get Canadian visas. They got onto a boat in Waterton Lake. They crossed over to the American side. They didn't need a visa, right? They were able to get off on the American side in Montana, walk around, couldn't go much further there. There were Homeland Security people there, but then they could go and back into Canada. So they could actually say they had been on US soil without having a visa, which was a big deal for a lot of the delegates who were coming from very distant corners of the earth. That was possible because this was operationalized as a peace park, okay? And both the Canadian Parliament and the US Congress had legislation which allowed it to occur, okay? So that can happen. Even now, there are still some issues with that peace park because, like, Homeland Security after 9/11 especially has insisted that the border physically be defoliated. So if you look across, you're going on the lake from Waterton Lake, and you know where the border is because suddenly there's this swath of trees which has been defoliated because they want to know physically where the border is there. Okay? But still there are these interesting arrangements which can occur as a result. But perhaps more interesting, the cases would be where there was an existing conflict, similar to the Middle East case, where the formation of a conservation zone allowed for peace to occur. And the most important example of that is the Cordillera del Condor region between Ecuador and Peru, where there was a long-term conflict. I had a question earlier on from the gentleman from the World Health Organization about other examples. And I said, well, I'll give you one. Here's one. In the Cordillera del Condor, you have a situation where for decades there was military conflict between Ecuador and Peru. Okay? And the United States and Brazil, they negotiated a peace treaty between Ecuador and Peru during the Clinton administration, where NASA agreed to provide satellite images, monitoring and enforcement of the area. And both countries realized that ecologically it's a very special region. There are also some indigenous communities that live there, so it's not depopulated. But it's not very heavily populated either. So in some ways, it's similar to the Golan in that way. It's not that densely populated. And they were able to come up with a joint conservation plan, which was administered by a non-partisan, non-profit organization, Conservation International. And it is still managed as such, as a jointly managed peace park. And conservation is what really stimulated that cooperation. It brought the sides together to think outside the box of just the territorial conflict, realizing that having military presence was actually deteriorating the environment there. And it allowed for that cooperation to occur and also to see the economic benefit of cooperation as well. Okay? So it can happen. There are some challenges to make that happen. And I'll go through some of the practical challenges, then I'll also talk about some of the theoretical aspects. So the military's role has to be transformed. I told you I'm a pragmatist. I'm not, going to sing Kumbaya and say the military is going to go away suddenly. No, it's unrealistic. I come from a country which has a huge army, the world's 4th largest army, and I understand the role of the military is very significant in that way, okay? So you can transform the military's role in various ways, which is what has been proposed in many cases with peace parks in conflict zones, where you can get the military to play the role of rangers. You can have cooperative exercises. In most cases, militaries already have communication. Between India and Pakistan, the militaries always still communicate. They may be saber rattling, but they do communicate with each other. And you can have a means and mechanism by which they are going to play a role collectively to de-escalate the conflict. When they may play that role through joint cleanup efforts. In the case of India and Pakistan, one of the proposed peace parks is in the Syrian Glacier region, where we've had an active conflict since 1986. And it's been an enormous cleanup disaster in terms of the environment. So the idea is the military can jointly play a cleanup role there too, if that was to move forward as a peace park effort. And the chapter actually on the Siachen Peace Park in my Peace Parks book was co-authored by the former Air Marshal of the Indian Air Force. And I wanted a military person to co-author it because I wanted it to be clear that this is not some pie-in-the-sky academic from Pakistan who's making this proposal, but rather an Indian Army officer who is saying this makes perfect sense also. Okay? So again, we're approaching this from a very pragmatic perspective. Okay? Sovereignty and territoriality is something that can be handled in various ways. This is a big challenge, you know. You can talk about joint sovereignty efforts. In some cases, you can deal with the very unusual notions of sovereignty, like Native Americans have tried to do in the case of the U.S. and Canada, where the concept of sovereignty has taken on many interesting forms. And again, legally, that raises some questions, and I don't have time to go into it, but there are ways to deal with that. In the case of the Nunavut agreement, which settled the land claim between the Aboriginal communities of northern Canada and the Inuit and the Innu communities there, it was through a very interesting mechanism of how sovereignty was going to be operationalized. There is also the question, though, which my friends in China often raise, is that they don't want the term peace to be used because peace presumes that there has been some conflict in the past, and they want to move away from that. And so you need to be very careful strategically how you pitch peace parks, because sometimes peace itself can be provocative, you know. So these are some challenges which we have to very carefully negotiate and handle with great delicacy, but they can be done. And there are some very deft diplomats who can do it. With visitor rights, for example, you know, we've had cases like the Sharm el-Sheikh situation where the Egyptians decided that this would be a very different kind of a visitor zone compared to the rest of Egypt in terms of access to people from different places, right? Hong Kong, Macau are examples. I'd say Hong Kong is a financial peace park because Hong Kong is part of China. It's a special administrative region of China. Most people don't need a visa to go to Hong Kong, right? Most people, in terms of US citizens, I don't think Israeli citizens either need a visa for Hong Kong. But to go to China, you can be a citizen of any place, and you need a visa, you need a letter faxed in Chinese to the embassy, and then only will you get a visa to go to Beijing. Totally different regimes in terms of access. Same country, okay? Macau the same way. Macau is a gambling peace park, you could say. It has the world's largest casino now, and they want everyone to have access to it. But again, you know, I'm trying to get you thinking in terms of outside the box. What may seem like there are no solutions, human creativity can find solutions. Okay. In other cases, you can have bargaining of issues, and in the Golan, actually, with the Fred Hoff plan, it's been land and water access control bargaining. Again, I'm not going to talk about specifics because we have experts who will deal with some of these issues on the Golan. But that can be another way of shifting the narrative from quantity to quality and access and control in terms of land versus water as well. There are also some policy challenges which we need to consider in various ways. I've approached this a little bit from an academic perspective. Since we are in a university, I think it's important to have that academic perspective too. Often, you know, social scientists will raise this question of endogeneity. Now, what does that mean? Simple way, it's the chicken and the egg problem. Which comes first? Will peace come first and then you have the conservation effort? Someone came up to me, they said, well, the Syrians will always say, first you have peace, then we'll do the peace park, you know. And in some ways that may be instrumentally missing the point, because what we're saying is potentially if you can have the use of the environment as a peace-building strategy, okay. And I think increasingly people are beginning to realize that is possible, that you think of it as a dialectical process. Okay? There are feedback loops. You take one step and then you get some good feedback and then you move in the other direction. So we have to get out of that chicken and the egg loop situation, which many who are trained in linear social science, often they tend to have that presumption. First this will come, then the next thing will come. And we can't move back and forth between the two. But the reality is any peace building is dialectical in that way. Okay, so that's how we need to approach that challenge which is often raised. And I think that you know, many people in the Middle East are also very interested in that. And I have spoken to people from the region also, and they are very willing to consider that if it is framed appropriately with assurances and monitoring, and often mediation is required in order to get that process to go, because there is otherwise a lot of trust deficit, as we call it. The pre-existing local conflicts can also undermine peace building, and here I'd give the example of Southern Africa, where the Peace Park concept has been popularized a lot because of the establishment of the Peace Park Foundation by several environmentalists with the support of Nelson Mandela after apartheid ended in 1995. The goal was that South Africa's neighbors would be involved in transboundary conservation and prevent conflicts from spilling over in various ways. And this was a time when Mozambique was just getting out of their conflict. You still had problems in Zimbabwe when they were getting worse, and Swaziland and Lesotho had their own issues. So the Peace Parks Foundation was established as a means of environmental peace building in that context. But the problem was initially they neglected some of the micro-level conflicts. In terms of, what do I mean by micro-conflicts? Herders, people who were already foraging in terms of their resources, and you put in a conservation model without considering those micro-conflicts, that can be problematic. As you know, conservation and parks have a very problematic history in that way. In the US, we know that parks were used as a means of dispossessing Native Americans. So many times when you use the concept of conservation without care, people may perceive that you are just coming in as a land grab. So you need to be very careful in how you frame conservation, that it will be joint use, that it will be economically something that won't neglect the concerns of the communities involved. And the Peace Parks Foundation, initially, they didn't take those things into account. So they came under a lot of criticism. I think they have remedied a lot of those issues now, but that's something to be very careful about in any kind of park creation conservation effort, okay? Because it can be misperceived in that context. Now, there is the issue of also the conservation agencies being so separate from the security apparatus as well. That is that overall management systems in governments, they separate environmental conservation and security. And there's often very little communication. Okay, that's a big policy challenge. And that's changing slowly. Certainly in the US, you're seeing much more crossover between now the Pentagon and the EPA, the Department of Interior, on various issues related to conservation as well. The US Army now has a US Environmental Command, and they are often involved much more so in the decision-making process, especially after the first Gulf War, when there were many environmental claims made about the damages which were caused and so on. It's still very imperfect. There's still the trumping of environmental issues by playing the security card happens still all the time. But it's something that the legal system, environmental legal groups are challenging, and that's some positive developments there. The NGO networks, and there's such a huge typology of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, that it's hard to just say, well, they generally do this. But what I'd say is a lot of the international NGOs, such as WWF, the big ones, they have been also a little bit more timid recently in approaching the issue of peace parks, because increasingly a lot of those NGOs get their funding from governments through consulting operations and so on. So it becomes very difficult for them to try and pitch something which may be politically problematic. And we've encountered that many times. And what I've said is those larger NGOs, they may want to then play that epistemic role. And they may not want to necessarily spearhead the whole process if they're afraid. But there may be other smaller NGOs, as we'll hear later today, some other NGOs regionally, who are willing to take the risks. And those should play a bigger role, okay? But many times what happens is that people who want to promote peace parks, they approach the big NGOs thinking they'll have more clout. And the reality is many times those NGOs have a vested interest to become much more quiet about the process rather than to pitch it in the same way. So you have to be strategic at what scale you approach this, okay? So some next steps in the short term which we should consider. The Convention on Biological Diversity has a program of work And in the case of, just for the context of the region, Israel and Syria have both ratified the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is one of the 3 major conventions which came out of the Rio Summit in 1992. It was climate change, biodiversity, and desertification. There was a 4th one on forests proposed, but it was not finalized. It fell through, basically. But those 3, so CBD is a major convention, international convention. It hasn't been as successful as we would like, but it's trying to move in that direction slowly. As you know, it's a laborious glacial system of international governance. But they have their next conference of the parties coming up in 2010, October in Nagoya, Japan. And I'm hoping that in the program of work already within the CBD, there are several injunctions regarding transboundary protected areas. And there is, in fact, a specific mention of the use of those areas for building peace and cooperation. Okay? So I'm hoping that at this meeting, there will be much more action on this regard. And delegations from all these countries, there may be opportunities for some closed-door meetings, to discuss issues which otherwise may not be possible also. And I've been working on some other efforts there, not in this region, but like between Japan and Russia on the Kuril Islands, which is a disputed area between the 2 countries controlled by Russia, but it's on the migratory pathway for cranes, and that has been also proposed as a peace park. You could have cooperative monitoring systems which have been developed in the US with Sandia National Labs in New Mexico. They have developed a whole cooperative monitoring center. They're the ones also who helped with the Cordillera del Condor case. They get together many times army officers from different countries to consider prospects for cooperation. They've done that between India and Pakistan twice, to have brigadiers from both sides come and consider cooperative monitoring systems. And the technology is really getting there, where when there is a trust deficit, you can use monitoring systems to help and alleviate that stress. We also need more empirical research. I mean, this is where the academic side is important. And I'll quickly just push through one proposal that I've been pondering with colleagues at the National Science Foundation in the US, which is to see how environmental inculcation can lead to cooperative behavior. It would help if we can sell to policymakers that, look, environmental issues are a way in your diplomatic arsenal to foster cooperation which are underutilized. You don't even think about them. The State Department, even in the US, they often don't think about the use of environmental issues as a diplomatic tool, right? So if we can show them with research that environmental stimuli, you may call it as such, can actually foster cooperation, that would be a big plus also. So we propose this with a group of psychologists, that we develop an empirical study to see how environmental stimuli improve the chances of cooperation between conflicting parties. And I worked on this with a German university in Eichstätt, because there's a very strong conservation psychology group there. And we hope to, again, revise this proposal and submit it again. We got some comments, and we're thinking of resubmitting it. And I'd welcome collaboration from other places on it as well. But again, this would really help people to see empirically how this can happen. A few PhD dissertations may come out of this also. Okay, so the other area I've been working on is to see how, by design, you can make people think differently. My PhD is in planning, in environmental planning, and so I like to think spatially as much as possible. And I came across this rather unfortunate book a few years ago called Zones of Conflict, an Atlas of Future Wars. And I felt, oh my goodness, if there can be an Atlas of Future Wars, surely we can have an Atlas of Future Peace. It was actually a pretty good book, but it's, it shows you the potential areas where there could be conflict because of scarcity and so on and so forth. Then my Peace Parks book was, trying to look at things from a slightly different perspective, and it got some good traction. We got endorsements from the head of the UN Environment Program and E.O. Wilson, those of you who know environmental issues. I mean, from the scientific community also, it was well regarded. But again, it was considered a bit too academic. So now what we're working on is an educational effort to develop an atlas of ecological cooperation, which will first be available online, and it would show how eco-regionally you could get cooperation in conflict zones. Okay? And we're partnering with the National Geographic Society because they have a huge access. I mean, in terms of the number of people, it's the subscriptions of the magazine, 22 million subscribers, the largest of any publication in the world, more or less. So the National Geographic Society has agreed that if we can raise the funds, they will put the atlas up on their website initially, and then we'll have a physical atlas too. But the goal is to use that as an educational tool. So at the grassroots, children who are studying geography will think spatially in a different way about border areas, border zones, in terms of peace building. Then it could be used by policymakers as well. But the goal really is to transform the educational experience in terms of border zones. Because when students look at a geography atlas these days, they see political borders mostly, right? Or sometimes they may see a physical map of the earth, but they don't consider the crossover in terms of eco-regions and conflict. And this would really allow for that to occur in a much more user-friendly way. Okay? So finally, I'm going to end with just some teasers on the Golan, because again, I'm not an expert on the Golan by a long shot, and so we have all the experts here from whom we'll be hearing later. But just some things to consider. You know, you have various governance structures which have been proposed. There's a confederation idea, which there's a lawyer in Los Angeles, Joseph Avisar, who has been calling for this, and he's even set up a virtual confederation between the various conflicting parties in the region, and he's set up a Facebook group with 1,000 members. He's holding a virtual election and all kinds of things. So there are all these very interesting, grassroots efforts, which is good. I mean, it's good to change the narrative in that way. There is also the Hoff plan, and Fred Hoff, who is the deputy envoy from the Obama administration, he published a paper with the U.S. Institute of Peace last year, where he, in fact, promoted the idea of a Golan Peace Park. So this is not as pie in the sky, even from the U.S. government perspective, because usually they're very timid on these matters, but here you have their deputy envoy who published a paper on it. Then there was a subsequent paper which was written by an academic who laid out some maps around the Golan and potentials for how something like this would play out. We've got the cooperative monitoring effort. I think Sandia National Labs can be involved if they're asked to in some capacity. You have also the water infrastructure solutions, which have been proposed in like they were in the case of the Indus Basin Treaty, where in the case of the Indus Basin Treaty, the World Bank agreed to fund 2 dams in Pakistan, which would deal with the distributive challenges of regulating the water flows as well. So you can think about some of those. These are, again, just teasers, ideas which people might consider. And then you have the role of mediation, which we need to talk about. How should mediation be handled in the case of the Golan, which right now I know both sides have been rejecting at various levels in the recent news. But those things change. I mean, you can't take all of that rhetoric too seriously. And the US and Turkey both can play a role. Turkey has offered to do so. So these are things to consider, and I'm going to end it there with a quotation from Anatole Rappaport from his work, Ecological Peace, which I hope will leave you with some positive reflections on seeing how ecological peace building is idealistic but pragmatic. Okay? Ideals are not always things that you can never approach in the same way. Perhaps they lead us in the direction. On my website I have a quotation from a Civil War general, Charles Schurz, which says, ideals are like the stars. We may never reach them, but like the mariners of the sea, we chart our course by them. So maybe the exact conversations around a peace park might not be the way they end up, but they could really lead us in a direction where you could have a very innovative solution to the conflict. And again, science is central to this, that we must think about the ecology of the region, which is what Rappaport was really getting at. And I've referred to it as the science of hope, especially since President Obama has given new meaning to the term hope in various ways with his book. And certainly it has been quite dramatic in the US in that way, that hope may at times have ebbs and flows and people may feel their hopes have been dashed. But hope is not something that is a terminal process either. It can recover in the same fashion as I've suggested peace building can recover. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions. We have about 15 minutes, I think.
Yes. We have about 10 to 15 minutes for some questions from the audience. Let me start over there. Yes, please. Yes.
I'm particularly interested in the marine environment, and I was wondering if you could say a few words about particular challenges of marine peace parks.
Yes, thank you. Regarding marine peace park efforts, there are several efforts underway. Actually, in this region, there was an effort in the Red Sea, as some of you are aware of that. But in Southeast Asia, there is a program also for some of the states near the Philippines and some of the islands in bordering areas, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Indonesia also, to build marine peace parks there. In some ways it's easier, in other ways it's more difficult. So the easier bit is that you don't have people living in the oceans, and so you don't have the same kind of property rights claims in terms of land, but there the issue is fisheries. So you need some kind of fisheries regime which allows for those issues to be resolved. Fortunately, we do have a very complicated international system on regulating resources of the oceans. You have the Law of the Sea Convention. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I've looked into some of these issues a little bit. You also have one of the oldest agreements, environmental agreements, is the International Whaling Convention, which goes back to the 40s, I think, right? So at least you have some structure. That's not enough, but it allows for some conversations to occur around marine peace building as well. So I would say in some ways the more difficult bit is that you don't have sometimes the same impetus for resolving the issues as you might have for land issues, because people don't live there. But the Southeast Asian case is very interesting. If you like more information, one of the other very prominent people who has worked on peace parks, Dorothy Zbitz, who did her PhD at Duke on peace park efforts. She's currently working on marine peace parks specifically. So I'd refer you to her work in that regard.
I would ask to the people who ask the question to identify themselves. Please.
Okay, let me just get I'll just get my translation on. Thank you. Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, I think they need a microphone. The translators need a microphone. Yeah, and you can come and speak in this mic if you like. You don't have a wireless mic. Yeah, no, you can, it's fine. Okay, he's coming here.
זה כל כך מסובך שכבר יהיה יותר כדאי לדבר אנגלית. המצב בין סוריה לבין טורקיה הוא מצב של שלום. לא אהבה יתרה, אבל שלום. והנה המצב המים בסוריה הוא קשה, מפני שבמצב של שלום טורקיה לוקחת את כל המים מסוריה. אז רציתי להציע גם לאוניברסיטה וגם למרצה הנכבד, אולי לעשות פארק של שלום, לשמר את השלום בין סוריה לבין טורקיה.
Did you get the translation?
Yes, I got it. Thank you. Yes, so between Turkey and Syria, the question was, those of you who maybe didn't get the translation, the question was that between Syria and Turkey also the relations are somewhat strained. They're peaceful but strained, and that perhaps there should be more of a suggestion to have a peace park between Syria and Turkey to sustain that peace. And certainly, I think there are some border areas in many other parts of the region where you could have that. I mean, you'd be surprised between Iraq and Iran. There is a major peace park proposal, which is also discussed in the book, to sustain now that there is some level of cooperation in a positive way rather than in a negative way. Right now, unfortunately, cooperation is in a negative way. So sure, why not? I would say that's a good idea, but I don't think that should preclude the role of Turkey in trying to broker peace between Israel and Syria also.
Southward toward the Golan Heights as well.
Yes, that would be good. Certainly, why not? I think that would be a good start, and that's something to suggest. Yes.
Professor Alon Tal.
Yes.
Alon Tal from Ben Gurion University. As you said, in the sea it's very easy because there's no people. If it was just nature, it seems like your vision would be much easier to achieve. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people, and peace parks tend to have to be more in a biosphere, which includes people. So my question is, what kind of practical mechanisms can you offer, models, that deal with the demographic problems, particularly in light of the fact, for say, that the Syrians envision 500,000 people, 500,000 Syrian citizens moving to Golan Heights? How do you sustain a stable equilibrium in such a park given the potential for demographic shifts?
Yes, I think the only way to handle that is through some financial arrangements, which would allow for, like with any kind of situation with the Amazon or other places where you have potential for either deforestation or migration occurring, then you have to be able to provide compensation for people who may have otherwise wanted to go there. So there has to be some financial arrangement. Otherwise, it's very difficult to prevent those micro conflicts that I was mentioning. But if it's more of a policy-driven migration where people are being deliberately given incentives to migrate, well, that needs to be part of that negotiation, that you don't want to deliberately, those people who have claims to the land already, who have had some historic association, then yes, you need to financially give them compensation. But for the others who are being given perverse incentives to move, that needs to be negotiated beforehand. We are seeing with the most protected areas that is possible now. The old model of conservation where people were just told, no way can you come here, is fast changing. And they're often offered some kind of compensation.
Okay.
This UN, my name is Michael Sish, retired World Health Organization guy. There is this UN Environmental Agency headquartered in Nairobi. You didn't mention them. I don't think they're involved in these things to the best of my knowledge. But they would be kind of a body in organ that you should get involved, may be helpful.
Well,
solve problems. You don't see that, but just an idea.
Well, actually, the head of UNEP, Achim Steiner, he wrote an endorsement on my Peace Parks book, so they are clearly supportive of the idea. And Steiner himself is a very enterprising leader. He's German, someone who worked as the environment minister in Germany, has been very supportive. While he was in Germany, GTZ funded the peace park effort between Tanzania and Mozambique in the Selous-Niassa corridor, which is the world's longest elephant range. And so they funded the establishment of a transboundary corridor for conservation there. So I think UNEP, and under especially Steiner's leadership, it would be very possible that it will move forward. UNEP is very limited in its mandate, as I'm sure you know. It tends to play more of a role within the UN system of providing knowledge and writing reports and synthesis and things like that. But if UNEP's role is changed by the General Assembly, where they're given more power, that may well change, hopefully. But there has been a lot of debate on the transformation of UNEP in recent years, and I think that within the next 5 years there will hopefully be some potential change in the UNEP system also.
We have time for 2 more questions. Robin Twite, please.
My name is Robin Floyd. I'm from the Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information.
Speak louder.
Yes, I try. The question I have is from the work that I did on this long ago. The problem is that this area, one party to the ownership, claims it all.
Yes.
And how, what, I don't want to drag you back into thinking about the galactic, but what incentives can be offered to the government of Syria to change its sense that it owns it all, that it will do what it likes with it, and that anybody else really has no voice because it is our property. As if someone were to build in your back garden, you say, well, we're going to share the house with that. They feel like it. And I don't quite see how that objection is to be overcome.
Yes. Well, I think in the Fred Hoff plan, again, this will be discussed more so, there's a land for water potential exchange in that way. There are also different models in terms of the assurance in some form or another of access to the land. And so the whole point is that you can find innovative arrangements, even if one side claims the entire area. You could have a joint sovereignty. There are many models which have been presented. The Hoff plan specifically says land exchange for water access and availability, because for Israel, 30% I think of the water comes from the Golan. So that's the major concern. But sort of the old concern in many ways of strategic advantage of the heights themselves has diminished with technological changes, as I understand it from talking to military experts as well.
We have time for last question, please. Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk. My name is Janice Golding from South Africa. I think the talks concentrated mainly on the cooperation between governments and NGOs, but you didn't get it well on the role of business. I just wondered about your perspective on that, particularly as it relates to job creation.
Yes, certainly. If you like, I can take a few questions and then wrap up. Just were there a few others, and then I can hear.
One more question.
Yeah. Yes,
please present yourself.
Dr. Linda Whitaker, Israel Nation Parks Authority. One thing that was not touched on was joint management of these parks. In 1994, I was involved in a project that was to establish joint management of parks on the West Bank between Palestinians and Israelis. Obviously, it didn't happen. But we were forging new ground, trying to figure out how functionally we would work together in parks that must be actively managed. It's not enough to put a fence around. You have to continue managing.
Yeah.
Do you have examples from elsewhere how this is done?
Yes, sure. Okay, so first regarding the business question, businesses have a very important role to play, especially if you're talking about the tourism sector, which has been used as a means of promoting the idea of peace parks. And there's an entire organization called International Institute of Peace Through Tourism, which deals with those issues specifically. And the Peace Parks Foundation in South Africa has been modeled along a public-private partnership, because in many cases businesses are involved, and the Peace Parks Foundation is largely funded by business entities in some form or another, or people who have had business links, like Richard Branson from the Virgin Group, or Ted Turner, or from the Turner Foundation. So the businesses have been very actively engaged in those ways. Of course, you need to be careful about the motivation, because you don't want that to dilute the conservation effort. But I'm all for getting businesses in a positive way involved. For example, in Mexico, the cement company of Mexico, Cemex, they have been very active in promoting peace park efforts between Mexico and the U.S., and they funded an entire big coffee table book with Conservation International just on transboundary conservation. So you find businesses have a keen interest on it. Regarding community partnerships, I'd say in most of the cases of the African peace parks, actually, much of the work in terms of management is very much at that community level. So you have the case of the W International Peace Park on the Niger River, which we have a chapter also in the book on. If you look at the Central African Peace Park efforts in the Great Lakes region, a lot of that is very much at the community level. The reason why I was stressing the government more so is because government is often the impediment to those community collaborations. If you can get over those impediments of border security and so on, then often you see that the civil society groups are much easier to cooperate and stimulate with the cooperation. Okay?
I wish to thank again Professor Salim Ali for very interesting talk, and I would like to invite the chairperson for the next session, session 1, Professor Yitzhak Schnell.
שלום. לפני כמה שבועות כשהתחלתי לספר לקולגים וחברים על הכנס הזה, אז התבררה לי עובדה מאוד מעניינת, שיש לפחות 3 אנשים במדינת ישראל שמשוכנעים שהם המציאו את הרעיון של פארקי שלום. ולא רק שהם המציאו את זה, הם לא קראו על זה והם לא שמעו על זה בשום מקום אחר. המצאה מקורית שלהם שהם הביאו אותה לידיעת מקבלי ההחלטות. אז נדמה לי שהמטרה החשובה ביותר של הכנס הזה לומר שאנחנו כאן, יש לנו הרבה מאוד ידע בנושא, ידע שיטתי, אקדמי, שניתן ליישם אותו. יש לנו ניסיון עבר, ומשהו מניסיונות העבר שצברנו יעלו במושב הזה. אז אני מזמין את הדוברת הראשונה, הגברת שרה שדה, לדבר על ניסיונות העבר בצורה כללית יותר. בבקשה.
שלום לכולם ותודה לסלים על הרצאה מאלפת בנושא. בסדר? מה שאני אראה בהרצאה הזאת היא... אוקיי. מה שאני אראה בהרצאה הזאת שהמחשבה על פיס פארקס או על פארקים של שלום במזרח התיכון אינה חדשה כמו שאולי רבים מאיתנו היו חושבים, ובעבר לאורך השנים היו כמה וכמה מקרים שרעיונות או חשיבה על פיס פארק עלו, חלקן היו חלק ממסע ומתן פורמלי, מסע ומתן בילטרלי או מולטילטרלי שהתרחש, חלקם על ידי גורמי חברה אזרחית וחלקם על ידי אנשים פרטיים, אבל בבסיס כולם מונחת השאיפה גם לשמור על הטבע וגם לחזק את השיתופי פעולה חוצי הגבולות. בחלק מהפארקים שעליהם אני אעבור החל תהליך של תכנון, אבל רובם לא יצאו לפועל בגלל מציאות פוליטית. עם זאת, הפוטנציאל למימוש שלהם עדיין קיים, ומי יודע אם בעתיד לא נחזה בהתממשות חלק מהפארקים האלה, בייחוד לאור העובדה שכפי שציין פרופסור עלי, הארגונים הבינלאומיים, ארגון השימור הבינלאומי והאום מקדמים את אותם רעיונות. אני אעבור מדרום לצפון, בסקירה מהירה על האפשרויות שהועלו לאורך השנים. חלקן היו יותר רציניות, חלקן פחות, חלקן נופלות תחת הגדרה או קטגורית של מהו פיס פארק, וחלקן הגדירו את עצמם ככה. אני נותנת פה איזושהי הגדרה מרחיבה, אבל לא מכלילה. לא כל פארק שנמצא באזור הגבול הוא פיס פארק, רק פארק שאכן שוב המאפיינים של שימור ושיתוף פעולה נמצא בבסיס שלו. אם לומר מילה על כרונולוגיה, אז הרעיונות של פארקים ברובם הועלו במהלך שנות ה-90 עם אופוריית השלום והשיחות הבילטרליות והמולטילטרליות, בייחוד אחרי שנת 94 ויציאת קוד בחריין שהיווה איזושהי נקודת ציון באופטימיזם על תפקיד הסביבה במזרח התיכון. הרבה מהפארקים האלה מוזכרים באיזושהי חוברת ממשלתית שיצאה בשנת 97 שדיברה על אפשרויות לקשרים סביבתיים במזרח התיכון, ויש בה פרק שלם שעוסק בפארקים ובשיתוף פעולה אזורי. אחד הפרקים הראשונים באותה חוברת שלא זכה לפיתוח זו ריביירה הים תיכונית ופארק הדיונות, כאשר הפארק הזה, הבסיס שלו מציין את היופי האקזוטי או האוצר האקזוטי של הדיונות שנמצאות בדרום ישראל, בעזה ובמצרים, והוא מציע ליצור רצועה של פארקים של דיונות על מנת לשמר אותם, שבהם יהיה תיירות אקולוגית וספורט אתגרי. וסדרת הפארקים הזאת דוברה גם עוד קודם, בשנות 95, במסגרת שיתוף פעולה אזורי שנקרא סיגה, שזה סיני, גזה ואשדוד, והוא חזר על עצמו בכמה אזכורים ממשלתיים וכמה נאומים של שרים במצרים, אבל נשאר בגדר פנטזיה. הפארק השני שאני נוגעת בו נמצא באזור עזוז בין ישראל למצרים, מספר 2 בשקף. אני ממש מתארת פה איזושהי ידיעה אנקדוטלית מהעיתונות האמריקאית שנתקלתי בה, מתואר בה ערב גיוס כספים של הקרן הקיימת לישראל, ה-JNF בארצות הברית, בלונג איילנד. בשנת 1987 נמצאת בו הגברת ג'יהאן סאדאת, אשתו של הנשיא לשעבר אנואר סאדאת, נשיא מצרים, והמפגש מיועד לגיוס כספים לבניית פארק בינלאומי לשלום בנגב, פארק שינציח את השלום הישראלי-מצרי ויהווה סמל לתקווה ושלום במזרח התיכון, תיירות אקולוגית, פיתוח הנגב ועוד. עכשיו, ה-JNF מדגישים שם שהפארק הוא לא פארק בין ממשלות, הוא פארק בין אנשים, מדובר על שטח של הקרן הקיימת לישראל שעליו ייבנה הפארק הזה, ויהיו שם מפגשי people to people. והדוגמה הזאת היא אמנם כמובן גם היא לא יצאה לפועל, אבל ניתן לראות שעוד קודם להסכם אוסלו ותקופת השלום, ועוד קודם לפריחת נושא הסביבה בשנת 87, בטח במזרח התיכון ובישראל, כבר היה איזשהו פארק עם ויז'ן לאותם כיוונים שאנחנו מדברים פה. הנקודה השלישית שאני מציינת, ואני לא ארחיב עליה כי יש לנו הרצאה שלמה בנושא, זאת סיני. אני רק מראה פה את אזורי השימור שנמצאים בין ישראל לסיני, ויכול להיות, הם יכולים להוות איזשהו בסיס פוטנציאלי לשיתופי פעולה. הנקודה הבאה היא ריביירת ים סוף או ריביירת הים האדום, אחת מבין 9 פרויקטים שהובלו בשנת 95 בפיתוח הטרילטרלי של מצרים, ישראל וירדן, בהובלה של משרד גרמני ובמימון של האיחוד האירופי. זה אזור, בטווח 50 קילומטר נפגשות שם המדינות, כולל גם ערב הסעודית, ותצורת הנוף מאוד ייחודית, המיקום האסטרטגי, הנוף והים מיוחדים במינה, מביאים לפיתוח מאוד אינטנסיבי, שכמובן מסכן את הסביבה ובתורו מסכן שוב את התיירות שמבוססת על אותה סביבה. התוכניות הציעו אזור פיתוח חופשי לכל עקבה, אילת וטאבה. באזור הזה תתאפשר תנועה חופשית של תיירים ושל אזרחי 3 המדינות, שגולת הכותרת הזאת היא הריביירה של ים סוף. רצועת פיתוח מאוד מאוד אינטנסיבית. בשנת 96, בדצמבר 96, נערכת איזושהי סדנה מולטילטרלית בהשתתפות גם האיחוד האירופי, נציגים של ארגונים בינלאומיים, של ארגונים מקומיים, שגם נציגי ממשלות השתתפו באותה סדנה לפיתוח ריביירת ים סוף, אבל המצרים בסופו של דבר עצרו את התוכנית הזאת והיא נשארה על הנייר. מה שכן נשאר לנו מריביירת הים האדום זה איזשהו עימות משפטי בין ישראל למצרים על הסלוגן ריביירת הים האדום. כל צד מקדם את הפיתוח התיירותי שלו תחת הסלוגן הזה, אבל בזה זה מסתכם. במקביל לנתיב הטרילטרלי התחיל להתקיים נתיב בילטרלי ישראלי ירדני ששקד על פיתוח פארק שלום ימי בים האדום, הפארק הזה מיועד לתת מענה לאיומים הסביבתיים השונים שנמצאים במפרץ, שנובעים מתעבורת נפט ימית, תעבורה בכלל, דייג, זיהומים, ספורט ימי ועוד. והרעיון לפארק שלום הועלה עוד קודם לחתימת הסכם השלום הישראלי-ירדני הפורמלי, האמת שבועיים קודם, ובהודעה שהוציא הבית הלבן שאתם יכולים לראות כאן, הודעה משותפת של קלינטון, הנשיא חסן בן טלאל ושר החוץ שמעון פרס, מוזכרת כבר היוזמה הזאת והמימון ההתחלתי ל-Red Sea Marine Peace Park. הפרויקט התקיים בשיתוף פעולה של כמה גורמים, החל משנת 99, בין רשות שמורות הטבע הישראלית והירדנית, ארגון האוקיינוסים והאטמוספירה האמריקאי ו-USAID שמימנה את הפרויקט הזה. בין השנים 99 ל-2001 התקיים הפרויקט הממומן, כאשר המטרות שלה היו שמירה ושיקום על מגוון המינים והמגוון הביולוגי באזור, פיתוח, קידום, תוכניות למודעות סביבתית, ודגש מאוד חזק על מחקרים משותפים, שיתוף פעולה, מוניטורינג וביצוע משותף ישראלי-ירדני. הפארק עצמו משתרע על 10 קילומטרים לא רצופים, כאשר 7 מהם נמצאים בצד הירדני ו3 מהם נמצאים בצד הישראלי, בשמורת האלמוגים. $3 מיליון הושקעו מצד האמריקאים בתוכנית הזאת, וסכומים דומים באיזשהו מאצ'ינג של ישראל-ירדן, וגם הבנק העולמי נתן פה חלק. והפעילות שמקיפה באמת מספר גורמים ממשלתיים הצליחה. בניגוד לרוב הדוגמאות שאני אביא בהרצאה הזאת, הפארק הזה במתכונת המיוחדת שלו הצליח והוא עודנו ממשיך להתקיים. כמובן, יש פה הסתייגות מאוד גדולה שמדובר בפארק שלום ימי, שמפגש אוכלוסיות בו לא ממש יוצא לפועל. מערכות ומחקרים שנעשו וגם איזשהו אזכור בשנת 2001 בכתב העת סיינס שמאוד התרגש מהשיתוף פעולה הישראלי-ירדני, וגם משיחה שקיימתי עם דוקטור ראובן אורטל שעמד בראש הפרויקט בצידו הישראלי, אפשר להגיד הפרויקט השיג חלק ממטרותיו, המוניטורינג המשותף, המחקרים, ההידברות השוטפת גם כיום 8 שנים אחרי סיום הפרויקט הממומן והרשמי ממשיך להתקיים, התשתית הניהולית המשותפת ממשיכה להתקיים, המאגר הנתונים, בסוף הפרויקט היה איזשהו טקס גדול, דוח גדול, והממשלות הישראלית והירדנית חתמו על הסכם, עד היום ממשיך מוניטורינג משותף. מה שפחות הצליח זה הצד החינוכי של הפרויקט וההצהרה של הפרויקט ככזה. רובנו לא שמענו עליו. הנקודה הבאה שאני נוגעת בה זה עוסקת בפרויקט של יצירת שמורת טבע חוצת גבולות ישראלית וירדנית, שמורת דנה בירדן ושמורות יהב ושייזף בצד הישראלי. שטח השמורות גם יחד מגיע לכ-600 קילומטר, זה שטח לא מבוטל, עם רצועת השקל של 6 קילומטר ביניהן. ההצעה הזאת עלתה במסגרת השיחות ישראליות ירדניות, וחברה אמריקאית, חברת הרזה שנזכרה על ידי ממלכת ירדן, עשתה פיתוח של התוכנית. הרעיון הוא הקמה של שמורה בינלאומית שתחזק את הממשק הניהולי של השמורות, תביא לחיזוק הקשר בין העמים כמובן, להשבה של מינים נכחדים לאזור, שיקום אקוסיסטמות, בעלי חיים שמצויים בסכנה, ופיתוח תיירות אקולוגית. אפילו היו רעיונות שדיברו על להמשיך את השמורה הזאת עד חצי האי סיני, ועוד רעיונות יפים, כאשר הערכה לעלות הקמה של השמורה הוא כ$2 מיליון. פרופסור נורית קליות שחקרה וכתבה על אותה שמורה ציינה שאחת הבעיות להערכתה שהיו בשמורה הזאת הוא ההרכב הפלסטיני של אנשי רשות שמורות הטבע הירדנית, שבאיזשהו אופן כנראה תרפדו את הפרויקט הזה, ועם זאת היא מציינת שהפוטנציאל של השמורה לצאת לפועל הוא מאוד גדול. אחת התוכניות הידועות, המפותחות והמפורטות ביותר של פיס פארק שנעשו בגבולות ישראל היא תוכנית הפארק הנמוך בעולם משנת 1998. התוכנית הזאת גם היא הוכנה כחלק מסדרה של שיתופי פעולה ישראלים ירדנים, כאשר עקרונות התוכנית נערכו על ידי מתכננים ישראלים, מתכננים ירדנים, בהנחיה של מומחי שירות הפארקים הלאומי של ארצות הברית. והמטרה הייתה לייצר שיתוף פעולה אזורי למימוש הפוטנציאל התיירותי הגדול של ים המלח כיחידה גיאוגרפית אחת, ולמצות אותו כפארק סגור שהכניסה אליו תהיה בתשלום. התוכנית ממפה את אתרי התיירות בכל אזור ים המלח, היא מאוד מאוד מפורטת, היא מציעה מעברים יבשתיים וימיים, ממש נתיבי שייט בין האתרים השונים בתוך ים המלח. מדובר על תיירות מרפא וספה, תיירות צליינית, תיירות טבע, תיירות ארכיאולוגיה, אתרים נופיים, ספורט אתגרי והמון המון המון אפשרויות לפעילויות, פעילויות יום, לילה, פעילויות לצעירים, לצליינים, נקודות תצפית, באמת תוכנית מפורטת, מרכזי מבקרים ועוד. ולמרות שפלסטינים לא היו חלק מהתכנון, הפיתוח התיירותי מוצע כשיתוף פעולה של ישראל, ירדן והרשות הפלסטינאית, כאשר התוכנית גם הדגישה רעיונות של שיתוף פעולה, פיתוח דרכים וחלוקת תחומי אחריות בין המדינות השונות, על מנת שלתייר שמגיע לאזור יהיה תמריץ לבקר בכל היקף הפארק, ולהשאיר כמובן את הממון שלו בכל היקף הפארק, ולא בנקודה ספציפית אחת בישראל, בירדן או ברשות הפלסטינית. מתוקף כך הוקמה איזו מערכת פיתוח ושיווק משותפת ומיתוג משותף של הפארק הזה. הלוגויים, הסיורים, העלונים, החבילות התיירותיות היו אמורות להיות משותפות ללא הבדל באיזה מדינה אתה נמצא. לצד הפיתוח התיירותי הוא הוצע גם לקיים מחקרים משותפים בתחומים שונים, ליצור דאטאבייס משותף לתכנון ולניהול של הפארק ועוד ועוד. לא רק שקיים כאן פוטנציאל עצום, אלא עבודה רצינית נעשתה גם כיום בתמ"א 13, תוכנית מתאר ארצית לים המלח וחופיו, שנמצאת בהליכי סיום תכנון. לפי מה שאני מבינה, מוזכר הפארק הזה כאחת האופציות לשיקום ושימור ים המלח. הפארק הנוסף שאותי באופן אישי הפתיע הוא פארק אלכסנדר זיימר, שמשך 12 שנים התבצע שיתוף פעולה לשיקום וניקוי נחל אלכסנדר בשמו הערבי זיימר בין קהילות טול כרם ועמק חפר, והקהילות החליטו לקחת את העניין של השיקום צעד אחד קדימה ולבנות מודל לפי המודל הדרום אפריקאי של פארק שלום, כאשר הרעיון הגיע מהמתכנן עמוס ברנדייס, שאני מצטט אותו, אמר שצריך להפסיק לדבר רק על בעיות ולהתחיל לדבר על הזדמנויות, וכך הוא הגיע לרעיון של הפארק בחיפוש על אופציה מה אפשר לעשות. באמת הפארק לוקח את הצדדים צעד קדימה, הרעיון שלו הוא ליצור מסדרון ירוק בין הערים, ליצור שיתופי פעולה, לשקם איזשהו חורש שנמצא ליד מחנה פליטים שנמצא ליד טול כרם ולעשות לו פארק מקביל בצד הישראלי, כמובן שיתוף פעולה, ניהול משותף ומרכז מבקרים. וכחלק מתהליך בניית הפארק הוזמן ראש ה-Peace Park Foundation לארץ, הייתה סדנת תכנון בירדן של משתתפים רבים, ובסופו של דבר הופקו ברושור ואיזשהו סרט DVD שמשווק כיום ב3 שפות את התוכנית. הם מחפשים מימון. אני אגיד שבהצהרת מטרות, שאתם יכולים לראות את חלקה כאן והעקרונות של הפארק, יש דגש על פעילות משותפת מתוך שאיפה לאיחוד בעתיד. לא מדובר עדיין על הורדת גבולות ועל מחסומים, על איזושהי רק שאיפה לכך. התוכנית הבאה היא מדובר על ירדן. בתוכניות המשותפות בין ישראל לירדן דובר על הקמת שמורת טבע של 100 קילומטר בין בית שאן לים המלח, ומטרה לשקם את הירדן, ליצור אזור תיירותי מאוד אינטנסיבי בשיתוף פעולה ישראלי-פלסטיני וירדני, עם תמריצים כלכליים, עם גם אקולוגיה, גם צליינות והמון המון רעיונות טובים ויפים. הוא לא יצא לפועל, מה שכן יצא זה 2 פארקים של ידידי כדור הארץ, אנחנו נשמע עליהם בהמשך, מתבססים על ההסכם הישראלי-ירדני, לוקחים אותו כמובן צעד קדימה, אחד בצפון הירדן, בדרום הכנרת, באזור נהריים, שבו יש ניצול של מצב סטטוס ריבוני מיוחד באי השלום, שישראלים יכולים להיכנס אליו ללא ויזות. יש שם איזה פיתוח של הרעיון והוא נמצא בשלבי תכנון מתקדמים. והפארק הדרומי באזור שפך הירדן לים המלח, באתר הבפטיסטים קסר אל יהוד, אתר עם משמעות דתית מאוד נרחבת, ושם התכנון הוא התחלתי, אבל לכך נשמע בהמשך. על הגולן אני אגיד ממש מעט מילים, כיוון יש לנו סשנים שלמים על הגולן. הצעות לפתרונות סביבתיים בדמוי פארקים ברמת הגולן עלו כבר באמצע שנות ה-90. רובין טווייט מהצד הישראלי העלה את הרעיון, 2 דקות, ובפני מקבלי החלטות ישראלים ובפני משרד החוץ, ולדבריו גילו אהדה לרעיון בזמנו. במקביל אליו פטריק סיל, מי שהיה מקורב מאוד לאסד האב בצד הסורי, העלה את אותה אופציה דומה, הוא הגדיר את זה כאופציה פרטית, אבל העלה אותה בפני הממשל. לאורך השנים נשמעו עוד ועוד רעיונות שאנחנו נשמע עליהם בהמשך, של ליאל וסולימן, פרד הוף, והמסמך העדכני ביותר של יהודה גרינפלד גילת, שהמפה לקוחה מתוך העבודה שלו. כל הצעה דיברה על אחוז שונה של שטח ברמה שיועבר לטובת הפארק, הסדרי מים, הסדרי כניסה. אני אומר כמה דברים שאני רוצה להזכיר לפני שאני עוצרת, זה בשנת 2000 המשרד להגנת הסביבה, או בשמו דאז המשרד לאיכות הסביבה, הזמין דוח שעוסק בהיבטים משפטיים של הסדר סביבתי בין ישראל לסוריה, שפרופסור אלון טל שנמצא פה הוא אחד מהמרכזים שלו, ובתוך הדוח הזה נמצא פרק על שמורות טבע חוצות גבולות, ככה שהרעיון לא היה זר גם בשנות 2000 פורמלית למשרדי הממשלה. כל הצעות שהועלו בנוגע לפארקים רואות בפארקים כלי שמחד יעזור להתפשר על חלק מהסוגיות, בעיקר אלה שנוגעות למים ולפירוז, ומצד שני יאפשר למדינת ישראל למכור את ההסכם לציבור ביתר קלות, כיוון שהאזרחים יוכלו להמשיך ולהיות מהשהייה בגולן ומהכנרת, ופחות הרגישו שהם מוותרים על הגולן האהוב. חשוב לי להדגיש הבדל מהותי אחד בין הפארקים עליהם דיברתי ובין הפארק בגולן. עד כה הפארקים שהזכרתי, גם אם אין בהם שלום חם, יש איזשהו הסדר בסיס שמסדיר את היחסים בין המדינות. המצב בגולן הוא לא פוסט-קונפליקט כמו שאר המקומות, אלא שהפארק שמתוכנן לפני שיש הסדר הוא חלק מיישוב הסכסוך. הפארק מתעתד להוביל את התהליך אל הפתרון שלו, הוא פרומוטר או זרז, לפחות לפי אלה שמקדמים אותו לתהליך כולו, והוא מהווה כלי סביבתי ליישוב סכסוכים או טרם יישוב הסכסוך. ופה זה בניגוד למצב המוכר יותר של פארקים בעולם, שבהם הם מגיעים כהשקטה, אני מסיימת, כהשקטה של הסכסוך. על לבנון, אני רק אשלים את תמונת הגבולות, אני אגיד שלא מצאתי אזכורים לפארקים, ולסיכום, רעיון הפארק אינו חדש במזרח התיכון, הוא מצוי כבר מספר שנים, ובעקבות המציאות הפוליטית הוא לא זכה לידי הגשמה. בכל המקומות שראיתי לא דובר על פתיחת גבולות או על הורדת גבולות, וזה בניגוד ללא מעט פארקים בעולם, אבל בצורה לא מפתיעה, אנחנו במזרח התיכון. יש זהירות רבה בנושא הסוברניות, בנושא הריבונות על הגבולות. הגבול נשאר על תילו, הפרויקטים האלה לא הגיעו לשלב הפוליטי, לשלב של ההוצאה לפועל והחשיבה האמיתית על הגבולות. הפארק היחיד שכן דובר בו כך זה על הגולן, בגלל אותו רעיון ראשוני הפארק הוא שיוביל להגעת הסכם. יש בכל ההצהרות ומסמכים המון פאתוס, המון דיבור על תפקיד הסביבה ביצירת הקשר בין העמים והאפשרויות להוביל את העמים לשלום ולא רק את הממשלות לשלום. ומנקודת מבט אישית אני חושבת שהפוטנציאל הוא גדול ומעניין, ועבודות הכנה שנעשו הן רציניות, וזה בסיס טוב להתחלה. תודה.
תודה רבה, שרה, על הדברים החשובים, ואני מזמין את פרופסור... תודה רבה על הדברים החשובים, ואני מזמין את פרופסור דני רבינוביץ' להתכנס לשתי דוגמאות ולנתח אותם יותר לעומק, מהו הלקח שניתן ללמוד מהאזורים המפוזרים בשנות ה-50 ומדרום סיני בשנות ה-80. תודה.
Thank you, Yitzhak. I'm fortunate to speak here after the two presentations we've just had, because I think Professor Ali made a very compelling argument about Peace Park as a useful concept for both conflict resolution, but also for sustaining peace. And Shachar Sadeh then gave us a good historical review, I think, of how this particular concept fared in the history of the Middle East. If you like, a list of incomplete attempts, ideas, visions of how to implement a basically good idea, and what happened to it around Israel's borders so far. Analytically speaking, the evidence that I will be bringing, and I will be mainly concentrating on the Sinai. I've dropped the demilitarized zones in Syria because I don't think they are as relevant, at least not my work on it, as relevant. For those who are interested, will be able to see it in this article, in this short, tiny URL at the bottom. But I will not be speaking about that so much. I will be speaking about the Sinai. And analytically speaking, my evidence from the Sinai, in a way, goes in a reverse trajectory to the logic of the two talks that we've just had. So there's a very good idea, but when it comes to be implemented, all sorts of things get in the way, and so far we haven't been successful. My argument about the Sinai goes in the reverse order, because what I will be saying, first of all, is that the notion of peace parks explicitly was not really entertained or suggested or even contemplated in an explicit way at any time along the long route of the negotiations between Israel and Egypt that started in late 1973 with the disengagement of forces brokered by Henry Kissinger and went all the way to the Taba arbitration in 1989. It was not on the table, peace parks. My second point is that, notwithstanding point number one, de jure arrangements on the ground for Israeli tourists in Sinai, especially in the eastern section of the South Sinai Peninsula, as well as de facto situation as it developed on the ground, were, and still are, astonishingly congruent with the logic of a peace park, if you like. So I'm saying that what we have in South Sinai is a de facto peace park as an unintended consequence. So that's my second point. And my third point is that if indeed an arrangement and a pattern of praxis developed on the ground that to a large extent emulates the vision of a peace park, can we identify the positive radiational effects, if you like, positive feedback for sustaining peace that grew out of this situation? So can we look back at the Sinai almost 30 years later and say that this de facto peace park played a part in sustaining peace? I'm not so sure about that. I'm skeptic about this third point, but I'll come back to it towards the end. So as I say, there was no mention of peace parks in an explicit way in the negotiations or in the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. The peace treaty is available online, and you can sort of read it, and I did read through it before this presentation, and there is no mention of any special status for that resembles a peace park in the Sinai. But on the ground, something else happened, if you like, independently of the idea, which at the time was also not as developed as it is today and as we've heard earlier today. One thing to be said about the relationship and the negotiations between Israel and Egypt is that it has always displayed a surprising level of flexibility when it comes to territorial arrangements. What you see here is an agreement from 1975 called the disengagement of forces. And you can see that this is in the western part of Sinai. There are 3 or 4 different types of territory east of the Suez Canal. Now, at the time, in 1976 and 1977, I was an instructor in a field study center in the Sinai, Bet Sefer Sadeh Tzukei David, and one of the excursions that we used to do with 12 graders for a 6-day excursion in the Sinai from Saturday night to the next Friday always ended by us going with them along this route here. There is a road that goes like this and travels to the north. So we were there for 4 days, and then we had to travel northward through here. And we used to go through a piece of road that was called the jointly used road, Hakvish HaMeshutaf, between Israel and Egypt. So every 3 hours, sovereignty over that piece of land and of the road would change. And we would wait for 9 o'clock so that we have 3 hours to go through. And that was the first time for me and many others to actually go by an Egyptian flag, an Egyptian soldiers. It was very exciting for everybody concerned, including the young tourists. So I'm giving it as an example of the kind of territorial flexibility that has always characterized relations between Israel and Egypt when it came to the Sinai. And then another sign of it is in the actual peace agreement of 1979. This is the attached map. And you can see, without going into much detail, that there are various territorial sub-units in the Sinai. And this had to do with the military arrangements in Zone A, and Zone B, and Zone C, which are in Sinai, and in Zone D, which is in the Negev on the Israeli side. There are different arrangements for what kind of military presence each side can have. Now, a similar logic of differentiating the territory of the Sinai itself was enshrined in the arrangements for tourism for Israelis after the 1979 peace peace arrangement, and after the whole of the Sinai was given back to the Egyptians in 1982. There was a 3-year transition period in which only half of it belonged to Egypt, and then in 1982 it was completed. One thing to say about nature conservation and nature parks is that there was, and I'm saying it because some of the reviews that we've had before from Shachar and from Professor Ali mentioned that there was no real option, I think, for joint management of protected areas. Israel had a park service which was established in 1965 and was active. The Nature Reserves Authority was active in the Sinai, but Egypt had almost none of that. And in fact, the main agency that was trying to make some kind of connection in terms of management of protected areas was the U.S. cultural attaché in Cairo. The American embassy was trying to put Israeli nature conservationists and officials with their Egyptian counterparts, but couldn't find anyone to work with in Egypt. So that really didn't take off. But things did develop in a very interesting way, which is relevant for what we're talking about today in terms of tourism. Israelis always did and still do need a visa to go into Egypt proper. This was very obvious immediately after the peace treaty was signed, when at some years as many as 800,000 Israelis, almost 15% of the population, went as tourists to Egypt. But the need for a visa was suspended for the eastern part of the South Sinai, and still is. So you don't need a visa today if you want to go to the coastal areas of South Sinai. You just come with your passport. You actually do need a visa, but you don't need it to be prearranged. It's stamped on your passport, and it's good for 14 days. If you like, a major concession on the part of the Egyptians, which also has to do with sovereignty, because it mitigates the type of sovereignty that is assumed and is acted out in that particular area of the Sinai, because Israelis can come and with no real procedure that gives the hosting state some kind of discretion about who comes in and so on, just go in. And this is one of the reasons why at times, during mainly the 1990s, you could find as many as 120,000 Israelis in 1 week going to the eastern part of Sinai. The numbers have gone down dramatically in recent years because of terrorist attacks in Ras Burqa and Sharm el-Sheikh and in Taba. But for a while in the 1990s, this really had a very significant impact on the ground. An interesting twist to it is that the area in which this impromptu stamped visa is valid is not very well defined. It's not very well defined de jure. You don't really know where you can go with it or not. De facto, you know that you should stick to the main roads. But there isn't a line on any map that tells you, as an Israeli holding this temporary visa, whether you can take this turn off or another. There is surveillance and there is some control of dirt roads forking out in various directions, but I know for a fact of a number of Israelis who actually veered off the main roads and went into areas where they were not supposed to be because it was well beyond the beaten track. It had to do, why were the Egyptians convinced to do that? I think for a variety of reasons. One is that Egypt's notion of sovereignty of Sinai has always been very flimsy. It wasn't very robust. In a way, Sinai between 1967 and 1979, or 1982, when the withdrawal was completed, was very much part of the Israeli cognitive geography, something Yitzhak Schnell knows a lot about how people imagine maps and how they imagine areas that are familiar to them, whereas it was very, very peripheral for the Egyptians. Also, the fact that Israel has always had such a vibrant nature tours and recreational movement also played a part in it. So Egypt was also impressed by the tourist potential that young, not necessarily wealthy Israelis have in using the South Sinai. And I think this was a major consideration for them to go along with an arrangement which, as I say, compromises in a way the kind of sovereignty and control that they have over people in that territory. So what I'm saying in this first point is that de facto we had a situation developing on the ground where many of the elements of a peace park are there, easier access for people from the other side, an opportunity to mingle for people on both sides, mitigated sovereignty, and of course the main use of the territory for recreation. So these are 3 or 4, I think, major facets. Now, it worked on the ground, and the next question is, did it actually radiate? Was it useful for sustaining peace? I've done other work before which critiques one of them. I'm a social scientist, and I've always been interested in whether the famous contact hypothesis developed by Allport in the 1950s about contact between populations and what they do, was it really and is it really conducive for example, educating people for peace? And I've done work with in Israel on relations between Israel, the Israeli majority, and the Arab-Palestinian minority in this respect, and I became skeptical about it then, whether contact does really promote peace. My skepticism, although not based on actual research in the Sinai, some other people have done it since, informs my skepticism about the role of Sinai as a de facto peace park in terms of sustaining peace between Egypt and Israel. This peace has had its ups, it had its downs. I'm not sure that we can actually pinpoint the situation in the Sinai as in terms of people-to-people relationship and the promotion of peace as a major component that sort of took the peace into particular heights. I will say that the economic interests associated with Israeli tourism to Sinai did play a part here, because for the last decade, Israeli tourism to Egypt proper has dropped to almost nothing, whereas there is still some flow of Israeli money going into Egypt via tourism in Sinai, some of it with Palestinian citizens of Israel, others with young Jewish Israelis, and I think this is a consideration which, to an extent, would still fuel the Egyptian interest to sustain this situation. Let me conclude by saying this, that I think that everything I've said now, including the fact that the logic that was followed in the case of the Sinai is the opposite that the one that we just heard this morning, doesn't mean that I'm not a believer in peace parks as a concept. First of all, for attaining peace, for conflict resolution, for the... First of all, as a means to overcome sticky points in the negotiations, and this might also be relevant for the Syrian case, because in the case of Israel, for sure, a lot of the obstacles for peace have to do with land, which is scarce and disputed now between Israel and the Palestinians, and in the case of Syria and maybe Lebanon with the Shab'a farms. So there is a territorial dispute, and there is a question of how to overcome it and how to come to terms with conflicting claims for ownership and sovereignty. And I think that in this case, the Sinai case study indicates to us that various arrangements, including mitigated sovereignty and including declaring the particular parts of the territory, if you like, as a third option, not fully this or fully that, but rather recognized and managed as a hybrid kind of territoriality through the medium of nature conservation, environmental protection, trans-border protected areas, and the rest of it, can, I think, still can still remain a very useful tool for actually getting us across the obstacles of getting an agreement. So getting to yes, if you like, which was one of the two characteristics that Professor Ali was presenting in the beginning. To attain peace is one thing, and then to sustain peace the second. As you can sense, I am probably not as optimistic, or a little bit more skeptical, about the ability of peace parks, whether intended or unintended, to actually work for the sustenance and to sustaining peace. But I am completely, ideologically speaking, I am completely open for being pleasantly surprised on this account as well. So thank you.
תודה רבה, דני. אני חושב שהמתח שהעלית בין הפוליטיקאים, המתכננים והפרקטיקות בשטח מלמד אותנו רבות שיש כאן אתגר של הבאת שלושת הגורמים האלה לידי חשיבה הרמונית ותפיסה הרמונית ותאום ביניהם, וגם להראות שיכולים להתפתח מודלים שונים שכוחות שונים דוחפים אותם. אז תודה רבה. ומהמקרה של סיני אנחנו נעבור למקרה יותר, או למקרים היותר מתוכננים ומוסכמים פוליטית מלמעלה של ירדן, ואני מזמין את גדעון ברומברג לשאת את דברו.
אז תודה רבה, וגם אני אדבר באנגלית. I'm going to come from a very different perspective of bottom-up peacemaking. The organization that I'm the Israeli director of is a regional organization. I think that very much goes to the heart of why peace parks and peacemaking is so much different when it's concerned right from the start of a partnership. And Friends of the Earth Middle East is a true partnership where we have a Jordanian director, a Palestinian director, myself as an Israeli director, Palestinian staff, office in Bethlehem, Jordanian staff, an office in Amman, and our office in Tel Aviv, where several of our staff, and really the results of this work is due to the good efforts of Elizabeth Yaari, Michal Sagiv, Mira Edelstein, and many, many others. We're talking about bottom-up peacemaking and the efforts and the where we are today for our efforts to move forward a peace park between Israel and Jordan. It's said to be post-conflict, but I don't think it's post-conflict. We're very much in the midst. We might have a peace treaty, but that peace treaty does not mean that there is not tremendous tension at the national level and, of course, at the grassroots level as well. We're talking about a peace park. We wish that the Jordan River would indeed look as blue as it does look on that map, but we're talking about a river, a peace park at the confluence of the Yarmouk and the Jordan rivers. Whoops. Okay, this is easier. We're talking about a peace park in the midst of one of the largest bird migrations on Earth, where some 500 million birds migrate twice a year. We're talking about a peace park that is really based on collaboration that first and foremost starts from the community level. And it truly is the efforts of the Good Water Neighbours program, started with 11 communities, with only one community, Tabkat Fached, on the Jordanian side. Today, there's in fact 9 communities involved in Jordan, 9 Palestinian communities, Jenin being the latest community that just joined on the Palestinian side, and another 8 communities on the Israeli side. We're talking about the cooperation of 15 communities along the Jordan River that have really led and promoted the creation of the peace park. A peace park created out of necessity because of the complete demise of the lower Jordan, where you see the mayor's Israeli Jordanian here on a kayak, because if they were to be in the water itself, they're likely to come out with a disease because there is so much pollution in the lower Jordan today. 98% of its fresh water diverted at the Sea of Galilee, at the Yarmouk and all the other tributaries, with little left other than sewage, saline water, and agriculture runoff. So you see the mayors of the Jordan River playing a very active role following several years of grassroots activity. And here I want to mention the work of Aviad Sar Shalom, working with residents in the Beit Shan Valley, in the Jordan Valley Regional Council, working with residents to identify the types of projects where they would see benefit from working with the other side. And similarly, an architect, a planner on the Jordanian communities, working with members of the communities to identify projects where they would benefit. And that's how the idea of the Peace Park comes for the confluence of the Jordan and the Yarmouk. It comes from the bottom up, and it leads to the mayors signing a memorandum of cooperation, identifying their commitment to work together. The only mayor that's still there is Yossi Vardi, but the new Jordanian mayor continues to be committed to the effort, and the new mayor of the Beit Shan Regional Council, Mayanot, Emek Beit Shan, also still continues to be completely committed to the cooperation. We're talking, in fact, about a piece of land which, even before the State of Israel was created, was the center of cooperation, because the building of the hydroelectric power station at Naharaim by Rottenberg in the 1920s and 30s is based on cooperation between Jews and Arabs, between King Abdullah I and Pinchas Rottenberg, establishing the Palestine Electric Company. Here, King Abdullah is opening the hydroelectric power station in the 1930s. It builds on linking water resources from the Jordan River, building a canal, bringing fresh water from the Jordan to a lake that is really the floodplain of the Yarmouk, and then, of course, producing hydroelectricity at the powerhouse, with the building of housing also on the island. We're talking about a unique feature of the existing peace treaty between Israel and Jordan of 1994, which in fact creates a bubble. And when Professor Ali visits the area tomorrow, he will go on to Jordan, and he will enter from Naharaim to Jordan proper without a need for a passport or a visa. A true cross-border effort, a true example of not so much a peace park because it's one-sided, but certainly of the movement of people, at least from of Israelis to Jordanian sovereign territory. And therefore, the peace park is based on expanding the area of what is currently the Peace Island. Despite the tragedy that happened there and the killing of 7 girls, there are still 10,000 Israelis that come on to the Peace Island every year. There are some 50,000 Israelis that visit Old Gesher to see the old kibbutz here on the border, but also another visual of the old of the old power station. Again, what the area looks like today. It's the peninsulas that Israelis can come onto at the moment, but it lacks the features of a peace park because Jordanians, of course, can still not go onto Israeli territory, and that's what we're all about. The reason why the mayor of the Jordanian side pushes for this project as much as the mayors on the Israeli side is that there's equilibrium here that's been designed right from the outset. So what are the goals of the peace park? First and foremost, a concrete example towards the rehabilitation of the River Jordan, because in order to meet the goals of the park, we need fresh water back at least towards establishing some of the wetland that used to be the lake. An economic engine that creates economic interests on both sides. Muaz Ben Jabal in Jordan, the Jordanian municipality opposite, has 40% unemployment. I can tell you he is first and foremost the person that knocks on the door of the Prime Minister in Jordan to move this park forward, because a feasibility study, a pre-feasibility study that's been undertaken here, led by a Jordanian company, talks of 500,000 tourists visiting the area of the Peace Park. And of course, the peace element, because this is a true people-to-people project. There's been many design efforts in place. This is just one example. Again, a cooperative effort. Unlike, I think, any of the other projects that have been talked about today, here it's cooperation from the outset. Jordanian planners, Israeli planners, Palestinian planners here included, and Yale planners providing much of the visuals that you're about to see. Deep involvement of the mayors, of community on the Israeli side, both at Naharaim and at Gesher. Deep involvement. This is the current mayor of Muaz Ben Jabal, visiting the design workshop that we held in Jordan, Israelis, Jordanians, Palestinians. This is just a meeting 2 weeks ago underneath the old train station of Naharaim. The three mayors are here, a representative of the US State Department, but we also have journalists. We have journalists from Germany here, brought over by a German tourist company called Studiosus, who are bringing this year 1,500 German tourists to look at the vision of the park. The park is not declared, but 1,500 German tourists have already added the Peace Park onto their itinerary when visiting the region. When we look at some of the further designs, we can see the combination of the Jordan, the confluence of the two rivers, the wetland that is being proposed as an attraction through the creation of a bird park that is on both sides of the border. We have 4 entrances proposed for the park, 2 in Israel, 2 from Jordan, with a theme, a strong ecological theme. Of course, in this park, no people actually live in the park, although it's used by Jordanians and Israelis for agricultural purposes. Every entrance has its specific theme: a wetland theme, a riverian theme, an Arab landscape theme, an Arab agriculture scheme. And here you see a master plan for the park, where the park is no longer just the bubble of the Peace Island, but expanding the bubble to create territory on both the Israeli side coming close to Road 90, which means actual movement of the military fence west. And we have discussions with the Israeli Ministry of Defense, with the Jordanian army. In fact, the British Defense, the Department of Defense of the UK, have agreed to prepare a security protocol for the Peace Park. So it's a third party taking the lead in striking the right balance for security concerns. This is not a park where, coming in from the Bakura entrance or the North Shuna entrance, you can just go into Israel. No, you can only stay within the grounds of the park. From Naharaim and from Gesher, you cannot go into Jordan. It is simply expanding the bubble, but making the bubble a fair bubble that incorporates the interests and the territory of both sides. The features, as I mentioned, includes a bird park, a bird sanctuary, which necessitates overnight stay. Overnight stay means increased tourist dollars, and therefore we talk about a guest house and eco lodges, turning the old houses at Tel Or into eco lodges, as well as, of course, additional accommodation in Muaz Ben Jabal on the Jordanian side, or on the kibbutzim and the communities in the Beit Shan area. We talk about a convention center. We've been approached by the business community to build a small convention center here on the Peace Park as a means to enable economic exchange to take place, because no visa, no passport is to be required in this whole area. We see the railway, the historic railway from Haifa going all the way to Damascus crosses the Peace Island with the historic train station that we'll see in a minute being an important feature and an important circulation of transportation, bringing back the train station and the train line, at least in this part of the Peace Park. Every entrance has been designed to feature the unique ecology, so that when you enter, there'll be a garden, and we have a famous landscape designer from the United States who designed one of the famous museums in Spain, the Guggenheim Museum, and she's brought these ideas here. And this is what one of the entrances at North Shuna might look like, with everyone leaving their cars, their vehicles, buses at the entrance, and entering the Peace Park through a security system, of course. Everyone would have to go through a security system, but without a visa, without a passport, as currently exists when you're entering the Peace Island. People can, from the Bakura Gate, go directly to the convention center without having to go through, because as an environmental park, we don't want 500,000 visitors, certainly not at one time, way beyond carrying capacity. So there's a lot of zoning that takes place here. You can see the vistas, many different areas with fabulous views that look out to this magnificent valley, nestled on the one side. On the eastern side, you have the Gilad and the Golan. On the western side, you have the Galilee. You're nestled in the Jordan Valley with magnificent vistas on both sides. Here you can see the circulation routes. No private cars enter the Peace Park. The train station at Geser comes back to operate. And the 1904 bridge that was built by the Ottoman Turks would, again, there's a carriage there today, but the plan is again to have the train move from Geser to Naharaim with two stations, with one station linking the North Shuna entrance. All other circulation would be by bicycle, by electrical car, or preferably by walking. The zoning of the Peace Park includes a development zone on the outskirts and protected areas, protected habitat, agricultural areas, riverain zones, keeping in line with its environmental characteristics. Again, you can see what the flooded area of the power station used to look like, but what the Yarmouk used to look like in the flood stage. Some further designs of the wetland and the Peace Park with photos from areas very close to us. These are photos from the Hula. So we know that these are proven attractions that hundreds of thousands of Israelis currently visit. The Jordanians, again, the major attraction, they see this as the major anchor to promote tourism for the northern part of Jordan. When tourists come to Jordan today, they mostly visit the south. They visit Petra, they visit Wadi Rum. Maybe they'll take a day trip from Amman to Jerash, but very rarely will they go north of Jerash. And that's not that Jordan doesn't have things to offer. It does. It has Umkeis, Gadara, Pella, but they alone have not been able to manage to bring the tourists. Jordan sees the Peace Park and the very first bird park in their country as a cross-border park, as a major attraction for tourism. And you can see more of the designs that have been placed. These are the old buildings at Tel Or that house the workers for the Rottenburg power station. Well, those buildings still stand, and you can't see that well, but they're in a V shape. They've lost their roofs. They're completely untouched since 1948. The idea is, and here you can see some of the designs to build eco lodges out of these old buildings in partnership with the private sector. So we're in touch with private sector companies to actually take this on as a franchise, so that the Peace Park would certainly have public-private partnership inherent in it. You can see the old power station when it was operating with water coming out from under the turbines. You can see the turbine as it stands today, one of 3 turbines in the powerhouse. Visitation, we're the only group that's able to bring Israelis and Jordanians since the 94 peace treaty. Naomi, who runs the tourism site at Naharaim, her very first visit is with Friends of the Earth here. We have some great ideas for the fabulous architectural heritage that is here, to convert it, to actually do very little with it, because it is so untouched. As how the train station looked like with a train. It's a Bauhaus building, typical of Tel Aviv, in Jordan, Jordanian sovereign territory. Our plans here are to be as inintrusive as possible, to have some adaptive reuse, but nothing much more than that. And again, some more intensive planning for the entrance of Naharaim. The Ministry of Tourism and the Ministry of Agriculture is currently investing 700,000 shekels in the further development of the Naharaim entrance. Why? Because they want to increase tourism to Naharaim, but also because they recognize the importance of Naharaim being the Israeli, the northern gateway to the Peace Park. Lots of ideas. This is the old Zero Canal. There's additional ideas of course, bringing water back to the canal. That's all what environmentalism is about. And the Ministry of Tourism, Aviad, has developed new plans here which show water in the old canal. This is the old dam on the Yarmouk. The old powerhouse that you see, well, ideas for the powerhouse with lookouts and with a information center and museum within the powerhouse itself, bringing back the old black and white tiles that are still there, untouched since 1948. And I finish with the Gesher compound, the Turkish railway bridge still standing. There's a carriage there today. The British concrete bridge and the Roman bridge, which is 2,000 years old, connecting Israel and Jordan in front of the Mamluk guest house. You can see the Roman bridge as it stands today. Some 21 different features of the Gesher compound that Israelis and Jordanians together, as well as the international community, has the benefit of. The phasing takes place in a staged process. We are currently rehabilitating the old train station. The old train station is currently being rehabilitated on Jordanian territory with the support of the German Studiosus Foundation. As I said, investments taking place in Naharaim, led by the Israeli government, and a tremendous attraction of support from other private donors to invest in what we see as the true, very first peace park that we will see, that we are hopeful of seeing, that we are confident of seeing, not only between Israel and one of her neighbors, but in the Middle East as a whole. So thank you very much for that.
תודה רבה. אפרופו פנחס רוטנברג, לפני שנתיים הייתי מעורב בפרויקט לשיתוף פעולה ישראלי-פלסטיני בנושא החשמל. ובדוח המקדים, בהקדמה הפלסטינית, הצוות הפלסטיני ציין את רוטנברג כמייסד חברת החשמל הפלסטינית. כך ששיתוף פעולה יכול לייצר תודעה, מסתבר. אז אני שמח על שתי הדוגמאות השונות כל כך והמעניינות, שיחד עם הסקירה הראשונה שמציגה את מכלול הרעיונות, מלמדים שהרעיון של פארקים של שלום מונח על השולחן. הרגישות האקולוגית של האזורים שאנחנו מדברים עליהם מבקשים זאת, דורשים זאת, ונקווה שנשכיל גם ליישם את הדברים האלה ולהשתמש בזה כמנוף לשלום. תודה.
There'll be a break now for 1 hour. There are 2 cafeterias in the area that you can buy lunch, and they've promised to give a discount to people who mention the conference. The hall will be locked during the break. Please don't leave anything in here that you need.
תודה רבה. עידית, תודה רבה, היה מאוד... המצגת שלך בפנים, את רוצה לראות אותה?
יש לי את זה, הבאתי את זה גם על דיסק,
גם קיפניס רוצה שאני אעלה את המצגת שלו, והוא היה פה איפשהו, יותר איפה יבוא. אני אעלה לך את המצגת שהשיגו. בסדר, אני אעלה לך את המצגת. רק בקשה קטנה אם אפשר... כן, כן, זאת האחרונה. רק אם את יכולה, אנחנו רוצים לעלות אותה לאתר שלנו. אפשר מבחינתך, אז רק חתימה, כבר השם שלך וחתימה. זה השם של המצגת. זה גולן... אבל לא משנה, תחתמי רק. עכשיו יש לך פה, זה מה אנחנו מצליחות. יש לך כמובן את האחבר. או עם האחבר או עם זה. זה פשוט...
תעבור מעמוד לעמוד, אוקיי.
כן, החצי אם אני מעביר קדימה.
כן.
ואז את לא מחויבת. איך שאת רוצה או זה או זה יהיה לך.
אז זה אני כל פעם מעביר.
את יכולה לנסות.
אוקיי.
אם תסגרי...
יש עוד משהו שאני צריכה לדעת. אני צריכה ללחוץ משהו?
שום דבר.
תודה רבה.
בהצלחה. יגאל? יגאל? Igal
Thank you very much for coming. Are you affiliated with the university? Oh, okay.
דני חותם לנו גם? אפשר להעלות את המצגת לאתר?
I see, okay, fantastic.
בוא רק תגיד לי איפה זה...